Educational GMAT. Your partner in your GMAT journey.
An official question. Epidemiologist. I wouldn't say 700 plus necessarily. I would say 650 plus. So obviously, epidemiologist is the author of this argument. And what is the epidemiologist concluding here? Very nice. And how is she, or why is she concluding that? Yeah, incidence of cardiovascular disease was significantly higher in residents of the cities whose air was more polluted with soot particles. And the conclusion is reducing soot pollution in these cities would lower the risk of cardiovascular disease for the residents. And we have to challenge this. We have to challenge this. For example, Baker anyway is out of scope. Why? Rural areas where we are talking about cities, correct? All right. Which one? All right. Okay.
Option D.
All right. Let's look at David, which seems to be a favorite. After soot pollution in one city was dramatically reduced, the incidence, okay. The incidence of cardiovascular disease in that city remained above the national average. Wow. Sorry. Okay. All right. All right. Tough one. Why not alpha? Anyone? In fact, I would say alpha is actually supporting the argument, right? Because it says that despite healthier lifestyles, right? This is what alpha is saying, that despite healthier lifestyles, residents of cities whose air is more heavily polluted with soot particles has a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease. Right? So alpha is then suggesting that perhaps soot particles is the reason. Friends, are you with me? See, in cities whose air is more heavily polluted with soot particles, people have lifestyles that lower the risk of cardiovascular disease. So, which means alpha is saying that despite a healthier lifestyle, people in cities with heavy pollution of soot particles have a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, which clearly suggests that soot particles are to be blamed for cardiovascular disease. Baker, anyway, we have eliminated. How about Charlie? Hiren, why do you think Charlie is the right answer? All right. Now let's look at Charlie. On average, among the 116 cities, the residents of cities whose air has less soot pollution have diets much less likely to cause cardiovascular disease. Well, that language doesn't help. Residents of cities whose air has less soot pollution have diets much less likely to cause cardiovascular disease. So basically, this is what the argument is concluding, that more soot particles is the reason for higher incidence of cardiovascular disease. Yeah, very nice. What Charlie is saying is that basically in these cities that have a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, perhaps unhealthy diet is the reason for higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, not soot particles. Notice residents of cities whose air has less soot pollution have healthy diets, which means where there is more soot pollution, people have unhealthy diets. So Charlie is saying that perhaps unhealthy diet is the reason for higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, not more soot particles. All right, let's look at David, which was also a very favorite answer. After soot pollution in one city was dramatically reduced, the incidence of cardiovascular disease in that city remained above the national average. Why do you think this is not the right answer? Why do you think this is not the right answer? Yes. See, the thing is this. Let's say this is the incidence of, very nice. Let's say this is the incidence of cardiovascular, correct? Cardiovascular incidence. And for a city, so let's say, by the way, let's say this is the national average. So suppose for a city, earlier the incidence was this, incidence of cardiovascular, right, events. Now, it's possible that after the soot was reduced, it did reduce, but remained above national average. So that doesn't tell us anything, right? Because see, if this is the case, then it is suggesting that reducing the soot pollution did reduce the cardiovascular activity. In which case, it's supporting the argument. Go ahead, go ahead. Yeah, so I mean, and as Prasanji rightly mentioned, right, we have no idea about the national average. So if the national average is very low, right, then despite the fact that the cardiovascular events have reduced, it could still be above national average. But then if this is the case, then clearly it is suggesting that soot did contribute to cardiovascular events, which is supporting the argument. What we have to look for is exactly the opposite, that soot is not the reason for high incidence of cardiovascular events. Kavita, clear? Chatrika, is this clear?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. Just a couple of more questions.